Hey everybody, how we doing? We are back again for another episode of the Bare Necessities podcast, and I'm your host Rob Napoli. And today should be a fun one, being joined um, from a founder who I met through a really good friend of mine and friend of the show, Anna Leibel. So I'm gonna try to say it right. I might not, but Hjalmar Gislason, right?
You got it. You
Close.
got it. You nailed it.
I love it. Hey, my guests know that it's sometimes it doesn't always work out for me, but sometimes it does. Hamar is a founder and CEO of Grid. If you're curious about, he's curious about data, technology, media, the universe, basically everything. Very interesting person. Before starting Grid, he was founder and CEO of Data Market, which was founded in 2008, which he sold to Click in 2014, where he subsequently served as the VP of Product Management for 3 years. He is a career data nerd and entrepreneur, and Grid is his fifth software startup. So, Hamar, thanks for joining the show. I'm excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah. And so we're going to get into a couple of different things talking about um, data stuff. But one of the things that I was, when we were chatting, when we met, I was really excited about is that this is your fifth startup, which means
hmm
you've probably been through some shit. And you could probably tell us, some wins and some losses. But what was it? Having started up 5 companies and sold, what drove you to want to be an entrepreneur, or what drove you to want to, be the captain of your ship, so to speak? Was there a moment? Did you just kind of fall into it? Did you always know that you wanted to run a business? How did that come about back in the early days of your career?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess there are two things there. First of all, like for pretty much every entrepreneur I know, it happened accidentally. Like I didn't plan to start the business at age 20. It just like we started working on some stuff and we liked it, and it turned out that other people liked it too, and kind of that one thing led to another, and then all of a sudden I was no longer studying computer science and I was running a small software company. But it's also a lot about role models. I looked at other people that had been doing similar things. There weren't a lot of them, not nearly as many as now. But also, I come from a fairly entrepreneurial family, and that's actually something that I just realized afterwards. Because, like, when you're growing up, everything around you is normal. But my dad had started 2 businesses in his life. My grandfather before him, had built a farm from kind of essentially just from the mud up and built it up to a kind of large cattle farm. So there's a little bit of that, and kind of looking at those people around me. This just felt a little bit normal. I guess you could almost say it the other way. Like there was nobody telling me that you shouldn't do this.
Hey, I mean, I love how you brought that up, because I think it's really easy when we grow up in an environment to look at our parents, and they could be our superheroes early in life, and then everything else is just like, oh, they're working, it's normal, whatever. And it's not till you become like, I know as I'm in my mid 30s now, I'm realizing things like I was like, when I was a kid, I'm never going to be that person, or I'm never going to be like my dad like this, or never be my mom like that. And I'm like, oh shit, this is why they make those decisions. Like, this is harder than we thought. And so you kind of realize after the fact some of the cool stuff that happens, or, for you, these huge influences on your life, and your father and grandfather starting multiple businesses, that of course you're going to just kind of fall into starting a business, as, if that's what you
Yeah.
saw. So when you're 20 years old, you're in school and you're starting this first business, like, how'd that go for you? What was it like running a software business at 20 years old, and kind of just falling into it and realizing, oh shit, people like this, and here we are, let's go. Like, was it scary, exciting, a little bit of both? Did you feel like you were just figuring it out, or do you feel like you had a pretty good handle on what you were doing?
Um, I think there are two parts to that. So first of all, on the so what we were doing essentially. So I'm in Iceland. I'm from Iceland. That's where I'm brought up. And what there was a group of friends, four of us. We started making computer games, and they were the types of games that you would see as mobile games today, but like small, typically language-based games. So most of these concepts actually existed in English and other languages, but they'd never been done in Icelandic before. So crossword puzzles and things like that. And we as we were, I think it was actually, we started this in the summer before all of us started university, but then we were bringing it together in the first semester as we were studying computer science and used it to to test out some of the things we were learning and so on. And we had something on our hands that actually worked, and when we put it into hands of others, it seemed that they liked it. So I think we had a decent handle. I mean, you always think you know everything when you're 20, but there were obviously things that we could have done better. But when it came to the product and the technology side of things, I think we had a pretty good handle on it. But we didn't have a clue what we were doing on the business side. I remember so two things there. First of all, I remember just pricing it and pushing like marketing and all of that was totally new to us, and it worked out okay. It was enough to pay the four of us decent salaries for the year and a half or so where this was the core of what we were doing. But that was pure luck. Like it was not a calculated business in any way, shape, or form.
Hey, we all need a little bit of luck sometimes.
Oh no, absolutely. I think luck is a very underestimated part of anybody's journey. And then secondly, I remember that we got into the local media because there was some interest in what we were doing. And the day after, we get called up by a venture capitalist, and I literally did not know what venture capital was. I did not know what kind of a share increase was, and or issuing new stock was. So that was all just learning by doing, essentially. So yeah, we so kind of going back to your question, tech and kind of product wise, we were pretty savvy, but business wise, not at all.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I think that that's what happens, right? Like a lot of times we have a specialty in one area or the other, and it's it's in doing that we learn. Like I think a little bit today, there's this in the information age. It's you got to be good at everything, right? And you need to be perfect
Hmm.
at everything before you do something. And if you're not, you just don't do it. And it's like, no, you gotta fail to succeed, right? And I think that we
Yep.
forget that too much. And so it's great to hear you say like, "Hey, we didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we figured it out, and it worked out for us." So that's pretty cool. So I know that that was back in the day. And we'll kind of fast forward. You did some really cool things, but you founded a company called Data Market, which you eventually sold to Click.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that experience. In the process of your five businesses, which number was Data Market, and why do you feel that Data Market was so successful through an acquisition from maybe some of the things that you've had in your past? Like, let's talk. Can we explore that a little bit?
Yep. So Data Market was my fourth startup, and it was started very much out of an experience I had through an acquisition of my previous business. I was working at a telco where my job was essentially to write business plans for opportunities that the telco might have. It was kind of the old nationally owned telco, newly been privatized, and they were looking for like, what do we do? Like, what's happening in the world of tech and business? And I came in there, and I after the acquisition and kind of started looking into opportunities. And I became frustrated with how hard it was to find good data to base the business plans on. Particular market data, like just market research data, and then also just socioeconomic data and demographics. And like when you're working with, telcos tend to have a pretty big subscriber base. So you're working with almost nationwide kind of statistics there. And this was all hard to find. And when you found it, it was never in the right format. So that was the problem that Data Market was set out to solve. Again, I think I was still, I mean, even though that was my fourth business, I underestimated kind of the business side of it. So it was, I am a product guy. I come from the tech side of things, and I still think that even when you think that you have enough business savvy, you still kind of underestimate kind of the go-to market and the how hard it is to get marketing and sales engine going. But I was certainly more savvy than I was three businesses before on that side. But that kind of the problem we set out to solve and built an excellent product to do so, and we were just starting to push that to the market. So the company was built here in Iceland, started in 2008. In late 2011, we felt we had a product to sell, so I moved to Boston to set up our go-to-market there, hired a few sales and marketing people, and started selling. And it was by most intents and purposes, it was fairly successful. We managed to build that up to about $2 million in revenue in our first full year of operation in the US. But we're still searching for kind of that repeatable business model that every startup is seeking. We had one large customer that accounted for like 60% of our revenue, and then we had a few subscribers that were paying us $50 a month, and then things in between. So we were still looking for the right way to go there. And then we kind of stumbled into the business intelligence world. That's where we got to know Click. We also got to know some of the other companies in the market. So like Tableau and Power BI was coming up at the time as well. And it turns out that the users of this type of software often also have to rely on external data. So while business intelligence is typically about operational and internal data, you're looking at how your business is performing. It also has to do with strategy, and often the internal data may be more valuable if you reflect it in external data. Knowing how many customers you have in a zip code is almost irrelevant if you don't know how many people are in that zip code, for example. So that's an example of how internal and external data come together. But anyway, so Click, we got to know Click. Click liked what we were doing, and they liked us and the technology we built, and also the ability to sell access to external data through their own technology. So that's kind of what got them interested. And then they made us an acquisition offer late 2013 actually, and then it kind of took most of 2014 to get that done for a variety of reasons. And in 2014, Data Market became a part of Click, and we integrated the team, we integrated the product. Lots of learnings there, both good and bad. But then, I was there as VP of Product Management for just over 3 years after that, before then leaving there and starting my current company, Grid.
That's that's awesome. I'm gonna go back to something you said. You're talking about data, right? Like knowing how many customers are in a zip code without knowing how many people are in the zip code total. I I resonate with that line. You said that, and it's something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs and founders need to understand out there is that data tells a story. And I used to tell
Mm-hmm.
people all the time, right? Give me data, and I can tell you 3 stories, right? Like data tells a story,
Yep.
but without internal and external data pieces and showing what that really means, like I can make data work in different ways. So it's really important, I think, for people out there, for entrepreneurs, that when you're using data to tell your story, and a lot of people that listen, are potentially going through fundraising, et cetera, is like show that data and make it work for a story, but also show the bigger picture, right? Having like something to compare it against and show like the clear picture is going to help you
Mm-hmm.
win, because people out there understand that you can bullshit a little bit around data and make it work for you. And so I love that you shared that. And it's kind of funny when you talk about the acquisition. Acquisitions are never easy, right? It sounds
Right.
sexy and it sounds like it was, oh, it's amazing. But, you just talked about it taking over a year. What were your emotions like going through the acquisition? Like when you got the call, like they want to acquire you, I'm sure you were super excited, but what was the emotion like going through that year? Because there's obviously some uncertainty with your current
Mm-hmm.
team and that team that you're
Yep.
leading. Uncertainty of like what happens if this falls apart, uncertainty of like what is my role fitting in. Would you mind sharing a little bit what the emotional roller coaster was like that year, and maybe some of the
Yeah.
things you had to deal with through an acquisition channel?
Yeah, no, it was definitely super interesting, and it happened at a time where we were planning a fundraise. So there was a fork in the road. We have to do we want to explore an acquisition path, or do we want to keep on going for the fundraise? And we decided to kind of set the fundraising plans aside and explore this opportunity. It was, just to be clear, it was financially, it was a great outcome for everyone involved. So we can just set money a little bit aside in kind of talking about this, because you know in as much as money and emotions go together, that was all positive. But then it was a roller coaster for sure. It was maybe 1 or 2 moments in those 9 months or so that this took, where it felt like it might fall apart. But for the most part, it was just going in one direction. It was just going very slowly. There was always new obstacles to overcome. And I think in these 9 months, this was never more than 4 weeks out. Like we were always 4 weeks from closing until it happened. And that, I think, actually, even though that is sounds funny and is funny, I think that is a part of, like, that's one of my big lessons there. These things take longer than you think, and then secondly, you have to make sure that you don't kind of drop some of the other balls that you have in the air while going after this, because I'll be, I had somewhat of a tunnel vision on making this happen. And I'll be honest. If this wouldn't have come through after the full 9 months, the business was, in a much worse shape than it was, when we started the process. Just because a lot of things that need attention hadn't got the attention that they deserve for business as usual, kind of running it business as usual, and keep building that as an independent business.
And I appreciate you sharing that because my first company, a company co-founder called Happy Group, we were acquired, and we were at a point where you know coming out of the pandemic, we pivoted and made some things happen. So from a team perspective, we didn't have much of a team, but there was this kind of tunnel vision as well. It's like we were going through that, we're going through it's how do we keep driving business forward? We had new customers coming in, we had customers that we're servicing. How do we make sure we don't drop the ball on current clients and current customers? And also, how do we tell them at some point? How do we make the conversation
Hmm.
happen for our book of business to maneuver them over in a way that makes sense, that they were excited about, that gave them, confidence and comfort. And so, it's really important, as you said, through that acquisition. It's really easy to get tunnel vision on the acquisition, but you still have to
Yep.
run a business, which is not always easy to do.
No, no, absolutely. And among the things that I dropped the ball on, and I'm happy to be transparent about that, was just the team, because again, this was always 4 weeks out, and we were going to kind of talk about that later. But also just acquiring new business for the ongoing business, because that's also hard when you are in the process of you know we were selling something that would probably not be available after the acquisition. So it didn't feel right to go out and push that and try to sell that to new customers if I knew that 4 weeks later at all times I would have to go back to them and say, oh, by the way, we're not doing this anymore. That just didn't feel right. But that's almost like there isn't a good solution to that problem, because what are you going to do? Either you sell it to them and then you disappoint them when this comes through, or you don't sell to them and then the business is in a worse position when you come out of it. And then I think the third thing that we failed to do properly was to talk about, we talked so much about the deal and how to get that done, that we failed to talk enough about what happens after the acquisition. Like, how are we going to properly integrate the teams? How are we going to properly integrate the products? How are we going to make sure that this gets the attention and resources it needs to be successful within the larger organization after the fact, as opposed to how much it or how we all the reps and warranties that we're going to put in place for the acquisition agreement itself.
Yeah. And that's interesting. It's like, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think that there's anyone out there listening going through an acquisition, just or any type of like conversation on this, like you got to be as a founder, you're wearing multiple hats. As a CEO, you have to do all these things, and just it's really easy to get tunnel vision. So give yourself a little grace and space to,
Yeah.
to be stuck in that tunnel vision, but also make sure that you don't lose sight of the bigger picture because you're the one that's kind of up there leading that charge. how was
Uh,
how was your time in Boston? Moving from you grew up in Iceland and running your business there, coming over to Boston. How was running a business in Boston compared to Iceland?
I I love Boston. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point, I and my family go back there. We all liked it a lot. We were. It was probably the part of the U.S. and the city in the U.S. that we knew the best already. We had quite a lot of friends there. My wife had studied there for one semester, and we had quite a lot of connections. So we knew roughly what we were going into, and we had a little bit of a network to lean on as we were moving to the city. But we left Iceland with with so there was four of us with 9 suitcases when we flew over, and yes, we had a place to stay, but that was about it. And so we had to kind of build our life there from the ground up, but and starting the new office for the business at the same time. But it was, I mean, I look back at the time with a lot of affinity. It was a great time. It was a lot, it was very busy, obviously, but it was also a lot of fun. It was all like, I like building stuff. That's what keeps me taking. And I was building on all fronts. We were building on the family front. We were building on the, in the metaphorical sense, meaning kind of building our new home there. And we were, building the business at the same time. So it was really exciting. And we started off, for those that know Boston, we were actually living close to Kendall Square on the Cambridge side, so right at the MIT campus. And it's one of those rare areas in the world that you can find this in a couple of places in New York and in the Bay Area as well, where you just walk into any cafe or any restaurant, and there's just creative energy. Like, you can just feel the creative energy in the air. At one table somebody's starting a company, at another table somebody's getting funded, at the third table somebody's hiring someone, and it's just that energy is so infectious, and it helps when you're building, because you get infected by it, and you get additional energy out of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I love so much about New York City, man. Is like you can
Yep.
go anywhere and something's happening, and you can meet somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody. All you got to do is be open to the conversation. So
Yep.
you're in Boston, you're working for Click, and then after about 3.5, 4 years, you decided to leave Click, move back to Iceland, and start another company.
Yep.
Was that just because you were kind of like, I made the transition, I did the thing here, I want to build again? Like, did your like entrepreneurial itch to be a builder start coming back?
Yes. So I don't think anyone that knows me, and I think that includes the people at Click that that led the acquisition and worked with me there. I don't think anybody was surprised when I left. That's not to say that this wasn't a great time. I learned a lot. It was largely a positive time for the company while we were there. A lot of learning experiences, also kind of being a part of a larger enterprise and publicly traded company. I was even taken private while I was there, so it was lots of different things to learn from that. But I also, there are certain aspects about larger organizations that they work well for large organizations, but they don't necessarily work well for me. So I was yeah, the itch to start building something and maybe being able to move a little bit faster on kind of creative initiatives started needing some scratching. And the a lot of people are surprised that I moved from Boston, which is typically on kind of top 10 cities in the world to start a business, to Reykjavik, Iceland, which I have not seen on such a list yet, to do this. But the reason is that I knew that here I could tap the shoulders of the right people to get that kind of founding team together, to then kind of snowball some of the best people in the local ecosystem around us, to kind of build a great team of 30 to 40 people, which is where we are now. And that's totally what's happened. We have a great team here, and great culture. And we're also able to kind of have an in-office culture where nobody has to commute for more than maybe 15-20 minutes, which is very different from what you would see in many of the other startup hubs, or let's rather put it in what you would see in typical startup hubs.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that that's also really important, right? When you're building your founding team, sometimes just knowing where the right people to partner with you are, and kind of
Mm-hmm.
putting yourself into that situation to be successful. I know it's really easy. We live in a remote cultural world where we could work from anywhere, and yes, that's great. But sometimes you need this certain energy or certain people or a certain opportunity, like having everybody to be in office from a collaboration standpoint, and for founders out there to really understand that when you're building a company and building a team, find the environment where it works the best for you and then scale
Yeah.
from there. And it doesn't
Yeah.
always, as much as I'm a big proponent of New York City, it doesn't always have to be New York City or Boston
No,
or
exactly.
the Bay Area.
Yeah.
It could be some small town in the middle of America or across the world. Like, it doesn't have to be in these big cities. And that's the cool thing is, and part of my one of the missions of my podcast is to interview some a founder and entrepreneur from every country in the world to prove that entrepreneurship is
Yeah.
everywhere, right? Like that is a mission
Yeah.
of my. I have a map up here with all the states and all the countries, and I scratch it off when I um, interview somebody from that country, and it's not as colorful and full as I'd like it to be, but it's getting there.
Yeah, it's a
But
great
I truly
mission.
believe that entrepreneurship is from everywhere. So um, yeah, I love that you shared that. So I want to kind of talk about the role that you're working on now. You're wearing
Yep.
this, you're wearing your grid shirt. That's your friendly data solutions. So
Yep.
when you were scratching that itch to get back on entrepreneurship, grid, what are you doing? Why? What was the problem that you saw that you're like, I want to go fix this, or this is something that we figured could be something that's worth getting into?
Yep. So if I just start with kind of the short tagline, what we're building at Grid, we're building a numbers tool for the next generation, meaning that we want to be the solution that younger people and younger kind of smaller organizations turn to when they need to do anything with numbers and calculations, the types of things that often gravitate towards spreadsheets and mostly gravitate towards spreadsheets today. But because you asked what kind of where that comes from, there are two things I wanna talk about. One is kind of what I experienced at Click, which is was at the forefront of what Gartner called kind of the self-service revolution, where the end users themselves were asking questions of data using these tools, together with Tableau and Power BI that I mentioned before. But as soon as I dug in, I realized that these are still power user tools. These are power tools, and you have to put in a few weeks to learn how to use them, and so on. So the conclusion I came to is that the software industry has been very busy building great solutions for data scientists and other data experts, but kind of the everyday knowledge worker that still has to do work with numbers and data and make some charts and tell some stories with data, as we were talking about before. They have been left with the humble spreadsheet for over 40 years. Spreadsheets are great and they are very empowering tools, and I'm a big fan of spreadsheets, but there hasn't been like a big mode change in them. So Grid is a very spreadsheet focused solution, but we add onto it layers that we feel are missing, like shareability, like collaboration, like just aesthetics, above and beyond what kind of a two-dimensional grid, ironically given the name of the company, can do for you. So that's where that comes from. The other aspect it comes from, because we were talking about stories and data before, and kind of how they how the two work together. One of my big idols in life is Hans Rosling. He's a Swedish doctor. I don't know if you've heard of him. There's a famous TED talk where he kind of, I think the TED talk is called "The Best Statistics You've Ever Seen," and he had a knack of doing really engaging data presentations, and like they are funny, they are just emotional kind of presentations of data, but he's always showing charts. He's always showing kind of the big picture that you see in the types of kind of socio-economic data. But I'm also a big fan of Humans of New York, which a lot of people may know, which is a photographic. It's a photographer from New York that has a knack for just going out on the streets of New York initially, finding interesting people, taking great profile photos, and then talking through some part of their life. And kind of you would think that these are polar opposites, but I think that the best thing that the most convincing and the best representation of anything is like Hans Rosling meets Humans of New York. You have to have that human element, that storytelling element that kind of gets to your emotional kind of core, but at the same time put it in perspective that only data can give you. Like if you are talking about refugees, you cannot talk just about data, but you also cannot just talk about one anecdotal story. But if you have an anecdotal story, or maybe two or three anecdotal stories, and you tie those individuals to the data, how they are representative of something that millions of people are facing, then you have kind of really gotten the best of the both halves of the brain, if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that great stories, I mean, and even in the art of storytelling, right? Great stories are grounded in truth, right? And truth is
Yep.
in data, right? And to me, that kind of like goes hand in hand, right? So I love that you kind of share that, and I agree with you, right? In this world of, and I get that we have these niches and these specialties, but in a world of very specialty different people, we're building tools for those specialists, and we're forgetting
Mm-hmm.
that you know I don't, as an early stage founder, you can't hire a data scientist to use Power BI and pay for Power BI and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's a lot of expenses racking up. What's the tool that
Exactly.
I can use? That's why I love, like, there's a couple of companies out there like Notion,
Yep.
um, Airtable, Canva, that are simple
Hmm.
solutions that give you the power to be a design studio, or your kind of all-in-one data hub, or a great CRM for free to very inexpensive, as a great starter tool versus going and getting like a Salesforce and a production team and blah blah blah. So having those tools and abilities, um, to tell powerful stories early on, huge,
Hmm.
and I love that. So it's really exciting that that's what you're building at Grid.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what these tools that you mentioned are exactly the tools that both we are deeply integrated with, but also that we look to. And we often talk about both Notion and Canva in terms of we want to do for working with numbers and charts and visualizations. What something like Canva has managed to do for working with graphics and kind of producing really professional output, even though you are not an expert in the field.
Yeah, and I love that. I mean, I think that's, eh, in this in the generation that we're in, Gen Z and beyond, right? We're kind of going back to being more of a generalist is a good thing, right? The old master
Hmm.
of none, right? Quote. We're starting to be in the creator economy, going back to, we can be more generalist because we can utilize these different tools to tell our stories that we need to and get the base layer without having to go specialist layer. So I love that you share that. And I think that it'll be interesting to see the evolution of the market in the next 5 years. Like, I think that it's like there's some really cool changes coming. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Because we are at this inflection point where there's a lot of saturation, but there's a lot of great new tech that are coming and making things easier, right? I always
Yeah.
talk about technology. Is it accessory or is it necessity, right? Like, in many products that
Mhm.
come out are accessories to other things, versus something like this, which is necessary for those that can't do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that you're kind of picking up on a maybe one of the bigger kind of trends in society these days because if you go back to our parents, like a career was getting hired at one company and staying there, as ideally hired at a big company and staying there for your entire career until you get the gold watch. But then my generation kind of is maybe more, in the sense that we go between the companies. There's definitely some entrepreneurial part there. But then when I look at people that are, in their 20s today, they, a lot of them dream about kind of being their own bosses and building their own little kind of, little business, often just themselves and so on. And they are empowered with by all this technology. But I think still kind of society is a little bit biased towards like uh, it's it's a little bit biased to both kind of both society and just the markets are a little bit biased towards the larger enterprise. It's very hard to run a large enterprise into the ground, and it tends to happen slowly, whereas it's really hard to get a small business going and keeping momentum there without kind of putting in way too much work for your mental health.
Yeah. Well, and I know it's a, and I love that you shared that, because I've been talking a lot about mental health on this topic, and I know that you've kind of mentioned this, that you truly believe that founders and employees, everyone can have work life balance and still be incredibly successful, right? There's the, either have work life balance or incredibly successful, and there's nothing in between. I know that you're living proof that you can have both. It's about how you manage those times. And I think what we're seeing with our next generation is that key on having that balance and being successful are coming to a point where, like, this is how we could do it. I mean, you can run hard for a while and then you take your rest and you run hard, or you can kind of go up and down depending on how your lifestyle is. We're saying,
Hmm.
hey, we can change that. We can do both and be both. We can be everything, right? As long as we have a plan in place to do that. And it's going to be interesting to see how technology shapes that moving forward.
Absolutely, and I also think it has to do with like just at different parts of life you can sustain different modes of working, and there is a lot to be said about kind of really energetic young people that can put in a lot of hours and have uh, a few commitments outside of work. But there's also a lot to be said about people that are coming that are further along in their careers may have quite a lot of commitments outside of work, but are by then much more specialized in what they're doing. They have a lot of experience to lean on, and so on. And one isn't better than the other. It's just interesting how we'll figure out both how we make them work together, and then also how we restructure some things in society and markets to kind of facilitate this.
Absolutely. I love that. Um, so kind of as we kind of close out here, the last question, if somebody came to you, say like a millennial or a Gen Z or somebody younger entrepreneur came to you and asked for advice, what advice would you give them?
I think the primary thing is to do what you want to do it for you, and don't think too much about what kind of what others think about that. But also make sure that you don't chase something so hard that it ends up ruining your health, either mental or physical. So I think that's kind of it's very generic, but I think that's the generic advice. Like what drives you? Where do you find your a path for your passion? Like that's number one. And then can you chase that passion without it having a detrimental effect?
Yeah. What I think, what I love about that advice is it kind of comes down to something we've talked about before, and I talk about on the podcast, is that the way that we look at stories and like when you read stuff online or watch and hear other people's stories, it sounds very linear, and it's
Right.
not. It's never. So you have to be able to chase what you want hard, understand your own mental health and all that, and know that like it's going to take time. There's ups and downs, and that success will come if you put a focus on both the business and yourself, because your business can't operate 100% if you're not operating 100%, right? Like when you realize that as a founder or even in any employee, that if you're not giving yourself, if you're not taking care of yourself, how can you give 100% of yourself to your job, to your passion, to your relationships? And it's not fair to especially for entrepreneurs out there, to your business or yourself, to not give both those things what they need.
Absolutely, and that because we're talking about stories, that stories, the stories we hear are biased towards the overnight success, and even that overnight success tends to take 7 years. So, that it's not a linear story by any means.
Yeah, absolutely. Hamar, I appreciate you coming on. Where, if my listeners want to get in touch or learn more, where can they find you?
So they can find Grit on grit.is, but it's also very easy to find me. Just chase me down on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And I'm actually I love hearing from people. I love sharing what I've learned, and hopefully others can avoid some of my mistakes and do their own mistakes instead. So yeah, just invitation to everyone listening to reach out if they think that might be valuable.
Absolutely love that. Paying it forward. Well, I'll make sure to put your Twitter, LinkedIn, and the company website into the show notes. So if you're listening to this episode or watching this episode, it's in the show notes. Go down, click it, connect with Hallmar. Man, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for sharing so much about your journey, challenges, things you've learned. I really appreciate that. So thanks for taking the time today, my friend.
Thank you, Rob.
Absolutely. Bear Nation, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay well and rise up. Bare Nation, thanks for listening to the bare necessities of entrepreneurship. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review.